Cuff her. Let's see what a diversity hire can really do. The words, spoken by the lead contractor Rourke, echoed in the cavernous concrete training hangar, each syllable dripping with a venomous blend of arrogance and condescension. He was a man carved from old prejudices, with a barrel chest and a jaw that seemed permanently clenched around a grievance. The crowd of operators, a mix of seasoned veterans and ambitious newcomers, shuffled their feet. A few nervous chuckles broke the tension, the sound of complicity from those unwilling to challenge the established pecking order. They were here for the Pandora's Box evaluation, the most brutal stress test in the Joint Special Operations curriculum, and Rourke was its undisputed high priest. His gaze fell upon the subject of his scorn, a woman standing alone in the center of the polished concrete floor. She was of average height, with a wiry frame that seemed almost lost inside the drab gray coveralls. There was nothing in her appearance that screamed elite warrior. No swagger, no hardened scowl, no overt display of sculpted muscle. Her name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma, and she was an enigma wrapped in deliberate plainness. She did not flinch. She did not retort. Her face remained a placid mask of professional calm as two of Rourke's assistants approached, the metallic rasp of the steel handcuffs echoing the grating quality of their boss's voice. Her hands came together behind her back with a practiced, fluid motion, offering no resistance. The cuffs clicked shut, the sound sharp and final, a punctuation mark on Rourke's public indictment of her worth. But in the darkened observation deck high above the hangar floor, another pair of eyes watched, missing nothing. Captain Eva Rostova, a legend in the intelligence community, leaned forward, her fingers steepled before her. She saw past the unassuming facade. She saw the subtle shift in Sharma's weight, the way she balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet, a posture of coiled readiness. She saw the almost imperceptible movement of Sharma's eyes, not looking at the men cuffing her, but cataloging the room, the placement of the mock security cameras, the structural integrity of the door frames, the exact number of hostiles arrayed against her. Rostova saw not a victim, but a predator assessing its hunting ground. The laughter on the floor below had faded, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Rourke smirked, clipboard in hand, ready to begin the humiliation. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction, type proven below. This was more than a test of skill. It was a trial by assumption, a crucible designed not to measure ability, but to confirm a bias. And in the quiet heart of that storm, Anya Sharma simply breathed, her focus absolute, her silence a promise of the reckoning to come. The world outside of her immediate focus had dissolved into an irrelevant hum, a background noise that could not penetrate the fortress of her discipline. Rourke's voice, now booming over the facility's public address system, was just another environmental factor to be processed and discarded. He was performing for the gallery, his words a pageant of theatrical doubt. The scenario is simple, operators, he announced, his tone laden with mock gravity. The asset has been captured. She is restrained, disarmed, and secured in a hostile facility. 10 tangos, armed and alert, are between her and the extraction point on the roof. The objective is survival and escape. Standard metrics apply. But let's be realistic here. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the insinuation hang in the air like poison gas. Success is not the expected outcome. The goal is to measure failure thresholds, to see where the breaking point is, to understand the limitations of unconventional candidates. The phrase unconventional candidates was a dagger wrapped in corporate jargon, aimed directly at Sharma. It was an institutionalized sneer, a formal declaration that she was an outsider, an experiment, a box to be ticked on a form somewhere far away in the halls of the Pentagon. The 10 hostile role players, large men clad in black tactical gear and armed with training rifles, took their positions. They moved with a casual swagger, their body language mirroring Rourke's dismissiveness. They saw the cuffed woman in the center of the room not as a threat, but as a prop in their instructor's lesson plan. They checked their gear, exchanged smirks, and settled into positions of lazy overconfidence. This would be easy. A quick and decisive end to a pointless exercise. While Rourke preached about her inevitable failure, Sharma was engaged in a silent, meticulous calculus. Her mind was a supercomputer running threat assessments and probability matrices. She felt the cold steel of the cuffs against her wrist bones, not as a restraint, but as a problem with a physical solution. She tested their tension, the play in the chain, the precise angle of the double lock. She noted the brand, a standard-issue model she had defeated in training scenarios hundreds of times, underwater, in darkness, while feigning unconsciousness. Her breathing remained slow and rhythmic, a metronome of deadly calm. Each inhale was a measured intake of oxygen, fuel for the storm to come. Each exhale was a controlled release of tension, purging any trace of fear or anger. Emotion was a liability. Rourke's insults, the crowd's skepticism, the condescending smirks of her captors, they were all just data points, variables in an equation she was already solving. Her gaze swept the floor, tracing lines of attack and retreat. She saw cover in the form of concrete pillars. She saw weapons in the form of fire extinguishers and loose equipment. She saw weakness in the posture of the guard closest to her, the one who held his training rifle too loosely, his attention already drifting. The true battlefield was not the concrete hangar. It was the 6 inches between her ears. And on that battlefield, Anya Sharma was undefeated. She had been trained by the shadows, forged in the crucible of missions that would never be declassified. Her entire existence as an operator was predicated on being underestimated, on using the enemy's assumptions as her most powerful weapon. Rourke thought he was setting a trap for her. He had no idea he had just locked himself in a cage with her. The stage was set, the players in position. The injustice was palpable, a heavy cloak of prejudice draped over the proceedings. But for the quiet professional, it was just another day at the office. The work was about to begin. The world plunged into violent chaos. A deafening klaxon blared through the hangar, coupled with the disorienting pulse of emergency strobes that painted the scene in fractured, stroboscopic flashes of red and white. It was sensory overload by design, intended to induce panic and shatter composure. For the 10 hostiles, it was the signal to begin their choreographed patrol, their movements still laced with the casual arrogance of men who expected no real resistance. For Anya Sharma, it was the flip of a switch. The placid mask fell away, not replaced by rage, but by an unnerving, absolute focus. In the flickering darkness, she became a ghost. The 2 guards assigned to her position moved in, their steps heavy and confident. They were going to drag her to a secondary location, as per the exercise script. They reached for her, their hands grasping at empty air. In the split second of their confusion, the equation was solved. Sharma dropped her body weight, sinking low and pivoting on the ball of one foot. The motion was impossibly fluid, a cascade of control violence. She drove her body backward, into the space between the 2 men. As she moved, her cuffed hands came up like a garrote. The chain connecting the cuffs caught the first guard under his chin, his own momentum driving his throat into the unyielding steel. He choked, his eyes wide with shock, his hands flying to his neck. Simultaneously, she kicked backward, her heels striking the second guard's knee with the force of a battering ram. The sickening pop of the joint was lost in the din of the alarm, but the man's grunt of agony was real. He crumpled to the ground, his training rifle clattering on the concrete. The first guard was still reeling, off balance and disoriented. Sharma didn't hesitate. She used her cuffed hands as a bludgeon, swinging them in a tight, vicious arc that connected with the side of his head. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. It was a symphony of violence conducted in near total silence. While her body was in motion, her mind was already 2 steps ahead. The fallen guard's rifle was a liability. She couldn't use it while cuffed, but she couldn't leave it for them to recover. With a deft movement of her foot, she slid the weapon into the deep shadow beneath a piece of heavy machinery. Now the cuffs. She knelt beside the first guard, her movements precise and economical even in the strobing chaos. There was no fumbling, no wasted energy. Her fingers, trained to operate by feel in total darkness, found the key on his belt. But it was a decoy, a test within the test. She ignored it. Her body twisted into a position that seemed to defy anatomy, her shoulders contorting. With a sharp, controlled exhalation of breath, she dislocated her own thumb. The pain was a white-hot flash, a signal she acknowledged and then filed away. It was just another piece of data. The momentary increase in joint laxity was all she needed. With a sickening slide of bone and sinew, her hand slipped free from the steel bracelet. One down. She didn't pause to reset the joint. She used the now-free cuff as a flail, a weighted fist of steel. The lock on the second cuff was no match for a series of precise, targeted strikes against a concrete pillar. The shackle sprang open with a sharp click. The sound was her declaration of independence. Free. She took a moment, a single, controlled breath, and reset her thumb with a grimace. The pain was secondary. The mission was primary. In the observation deck, the room was silent save for the muffled blare of the klaxon from the floor below. Rourke stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the clipboard forgotten in his hand. The nervous chuckles were a distant memory, replaced by a collective, stunned awe. Captain Rostova watched, her expression unchanging, but a glint of fierce pride shone in her eyes. The Pandora's box had just been opened, and the myth Rourke had built his career on, the myth of female inadequacy in combat, was being systematically, brutally, and silently dismantled before his very eyes. The escape from the cuffs was not an end, but a beginning. It was the first note in a brutalist opera of competence. Anya Sharma melted back into the shadows, a wraith in the flashing chaos. The remaining 8 hostiles were beginning to realize something was wrong. The 2 guards at the starting point were down, and their primary asset was no longer where she was supposed to be. Their casual confidence evaporated, replaced by a thread of genuine tactical concern. They began to move with more purpose, sweeping their sectors, their training kicking in. But they were reacting to a script that had already been torn to shreds. Sharma was no longer the asset. She was the hunter. She moved with a silence that was unnatural, her feet finding purchase on the concrete without a single scrape or shuffle. She flowed between the stacks of crates and machinery, a creature of the liminal spaces. The third hostile, a hulking man who prided himself on his physical strength, rounded a corner, his rifle held at the low ready. He was met not with a direct assault, but with a whisper of movement at his periphery. He turned, and in that moment of distraction, Sharma struck from the other side. She didn't try to match his strength. She used his own mass against him. Her hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm, striking the side of his rifle. The unexpected force, combined with his forward momentum, sent him stumbling. As he fought for balance, she was already behind him, her forearm slipping under his chin, her other hand locking on the back of his head. It was a textbook chokehold, applied with surgical precision. The man struggled for a few seconds, his powerful arms flailing uselessly, before his body went limp. She lowered him to the ground gently, silently, retrieving his sidearm and 2 spare magazines before disappearing again. The observers on the deck watched the monitors, their faces a mixture of disbelief and reverence. "No way," one of the younger operators whispered, his voice cracking. "She's a ghost. We can't even track her on the thermal." Rourke's face had gone from pink with arrogance to pale with shock. His entire professional worldview was crumbling in real time. He had built a career on the unshakable belief that combat effectiveness was a matter of size and brute strength, a domain exclusive to men like him. The woman on the screen was a living, breathing, lethally efficient refutation of his life's dogma. He kept waiting for her to make a mistake, to get cornered, to be overwhelmed. But it never happened. Hostiles 4 and 5 were working as a pair, clearing a section of the hangar with practiced efficiency. They were good, but Sharma was better. She used the environment as a weapon. She dislodged a small metal pipe from a conduit, letting it clatter to the ground 20 yards to their left. As they pivoted towards the sound, Instincts overriding discipline for a fatal second, she emerged from the darkness on their right. She moved in a low crouch, a blur of motion. The first man was dispatched with 2 lightning-fast strikes, one to the brachial nerve in his arm, causing him to drop his rifle, and a second to the temple with the butt of her newly acquired pistol. The second man spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too late. Sharma was already on him, the muzzle of her pistol pressed against his side. A simulated double tap, indicated by the laser on her weapon painting 2 red dots on his torso, and he was out of the exercise. Guard 4, Guard 5, you're out. A neutral voice announced over their comms, the exercise controller marking them as casualties. The silence that followed on the training floor was deafening. The remaining 5 hostiles now understood. This was not a training exercise anymore. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a primal fear. They consolidated their positions, forming a tight perimeter, their backs to one another. They were no longer searching for a victim. They were trying to survive a predator. On the observation deck, the atmosphere had changed from a sporting event to a religious service. There was a hush, a sense of bearing witness to something extraordinary. Rourke sank into a chair, his face ashen. The words he had spoken just minutes ago, diversity higher, unconventional candidates, failure thresholds, mocked him from the abyss of his own ignorance. He was not just wrong. He was profoundly, fundamentally, and publicly wrong. The woman he had tried to humiliate was putting on a masterclass in tactical dominance, a lesson that would be burned into the memory of everyone present for the rest of their careers. The final 5 hostiles had fortified their position near the center of the hangar, using a cluster of large shipping containers as a makeshift fortress. Their fear had made them predictable. They had abandoned offense entirely, clinging to the false security of a defensive posture. For Sharma, this was the endgame. They had surrendered the initiative, and in doing so, had sealed their fate. From the darkness above, she watched them from a catwalk she had reached with the silence and agility of a cat. She had taken the high ground without a single one of them noticing. She was patient. She observed their patterns, the rhythm of their scans, the subtle tells of their anxiety. They were listening for footsteps on the concrete, not for a shadow detaching itself from the ceiling. She dropped. It wasn't a reckless leap, but a controlled descent, using a thick electrical conduit to slide the last 20 feet. She landed behind a piece of machinery with a whisper of sound that was swallowed by the ever-present hum of the hangar's ventilation system. She was now inside their perimeter. The hunt had entered its final, intimate phase. The first of the remaining 5 fell without knowing she was there. A swift, silent takedown from behind, a simulated knife strike to the neck indicated by a firm tap. She eased his body to the ground, taking his position. Now there were 4. She used the down man's radio. A single click, a burst of static. It was enough. One of the remaining guards, his nerves frayed, broke formation to investigate. It was the mistake she had been waiting for. He moved cautiously, his rifle up, sweeping the shadows. Sharma was no longer in the shadows. She was standing in plain sight, using the strobing lights to her advantage, appearing and disappearing in the flashes. The guard saw a flicker of movement, but his brain couldn't process it. By the time he realized it was a person, she had closed the distance. A disarming maneuver, a twist of the wrist, and his rifle was hers. A pistol strike to the back of the helmet, and he was down. 3 left. They heard the scuffle and opened fire, their training rounds peppering the containers where they thought she was. But she was already moving, using their muzzle flashes to pinpoint their exact locations. She flanked them, a phantom in the chaotic light. A double tap for one, a leg sweep, and a submission hold for the other. Now, only the team leader remained. He was the best of them, a seasoned operator in his own right. He stood his ground, his back against the container, rifle at the ready. Exercise complete. A calm, authoritative voice echoed through the hangar's PA system. The klaxon and strobes ceased. The main bay lights flooded the room with sterile, white light. The sudden transition from chaos to silence was jarring. In the center of the room, Amidst the 10 downed hostile role-players stood Anya Sharma. She was not breathing heavily. Her uniform was barely askew. She held the training pistol in a perfect low-ready position. She was the calm center of a storm that had just passed. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy with unspoken awe. Every operator on the observation deck was on their feet, staring at the scene below. They had just witnessed a complete tactical demolition, a flawless performance of such overwhelming competence that it bordered on art. Rourke was still in his chair, a man hollowed out by the force of the truth he had just been shown. His certainty, his prejudice, his entire professional identity had been dismantled as efficiently as Sharma had dismantled his team of hostiles. Captain Eva Rostova stood up. She keyed the microphone, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Mr. Rourke, my office." Now, it was not a request. It was a summons. The trial by assumption was over. The sentencing was about to begin. Captain Rostova did not wait for Rourke to arrive at her office. She met him on the observation deck, in full view of the assembled operators who were still processing the spectacle they had witnessed. She moved with an economy of motion that mirrored Sharma's, a quiet authority that required no raised voice. Rourke, by contrast, looked like a man who had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a sullen, defensive shell. He couldn't meet her eyes. Rostova gestured to the main tactical display, a massive screen that dominated one wall of the observation deck. "Bring up the file," she commanded to a nearby technician. "Authorization. Rostova. Echo 79er." The technician's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, a personnel file filled the screen. It was minimalist, heavily redacted, but the information that was visible landed with the force of a series of hammer blows. The name at the top read, Sharma, NY. Senior Chief Petty Officer, U.S. Navy. Below it, the litany of her life's work began to scroll, each line a refutation of Rourke's ignorant dismissal. "Unit," Rostova read aloud, her voice cold and clear, resonating with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group." A collective gasp went through the room. DevGru, the elite of the elite. The unit known to the public as SEAL Team 6. Rourke's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Call sign, Echo," Rostova continued, her eyes boring into Rourke. "Years in service, 14. Combat deploiement, 12. Locations." Classified, the screen showed a list of operational theaters, but each one was just a solid black bar. The redactions themselves spoke louder than any name. "Medals," she said, her voice dropping slightly, taking on a tone of reverence. "Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in combat. Silver Star, with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star, with V4 Valor device. Purple Heart, with 3 clusters." The list went on, a testament to a warrior's journey through the darkest places on Earth. "Special qualifications." Rostova's voice was now like ice. "Master Breacher, Lead Combat Médic, 18 déqualifié. Advanced Seer Instructor, Maritime Interdiction Spécialiste. Tier 1 Operator." She paused, letting the weight of that final designation settle over the room. Tier 1. The pinnacle. The quiet professional. Rourke looked from a screen to the woman standing calmly on the hangar floor below, and something inside him finally broke. The arrogance, the prejudice, the lifetime of assumptions, it all shattered, leaving only the raw, humbling truth. He had not been testing a candidate. He had been mocking a master. Rostova wasn't finished. She walked from the observation deck, down the steel staircase, to the training floor. The other operators parted before her like the sea. She walked directly to Sharma, who had holstered her weapon and was standing at ease. The entire base seemed to be holding its breath. A captain in O6 and a senior chief petty officer in E8. Rostova stopped a foot in front of her. She didn't offer a handshake. She didn't offer a word of praise. She did something far more powerful. Captain Eva Rostova, a command officer with 30 years of service, brought her heels together and rendered a slow, sharp, perfect salute. It was a gesture of profound respect, a public acknowledgement from one legend to another. In the rigid hierarchy of the military, it was an earthquake. "Senior Chief," Rostova said, her voice filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Well done." Anya Sharma returned the salute with the same crisp precision. Her face remained impassive, but for the first time, a flicker of something showed in her eyes. Not pride, but a quiet acknowledgement of a debt paid and a truth revealed. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied, her voice steady and clear. The validation was complete. It was not given in a private debrief or a quiet word of praise. It was delivered in public, a thunderous declaration that competence, not gender, was the only metric that mattered. The story of what happened in the Pandora's box hangar spread not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled first in hushed, reverent tones through the barracks of the Special Operations Training Center. Then it jumped to secure message terminals, a flurry of encrypted texts between operators in different units, different services, different corners of the globe. "Did you hear about the DevGru ghost at the joint facility?" One message would read. The one they called Echo. The details became mythic in the retelling. 10 hostiles became 20. The handcuffs became chains. The silent takedowns became feats of supernatural stealth. But the core of the story, the undeniable truth of it, remained intact. A quiet professional had reminded an entire institution what true strength looked like. Rourke was required to attend the official debrief, which Captain Rostova conducted in the main theater, with every operator from the exercise present. He walked to the front of the room, his face etched with a humility he had never known. There was no excuse, no justification. He stood before the men he had led and the woman he had belittled, and he spoke the simple, unvarnished truth. "I was wrong," he said, his voice stripped of its usual booming confidence. "My assumptions were unprofessional. My judgment was compromised by biases I failed to recognize. What we witnessed today was not an evaluation. It was a masterclass." He then turned to face Sharma, who sat in the front row, her posture as unassuming as ever. "Senior Chief," he said, and the use of her proper title was an admission of defeat and a gesture of respect in itself. "There is no excuse for my conduct. I apologize. What you demonstrated was beyond professional. It was artistry." Anya Sharma simply looked at him and gave a slow, deliberate nod. There was no malice in her expression, no hint of triumph. Her acceptance of his apology was as quiet and professional as her execution of the exercise. Later that day, as she was cleaning her gear, a young female Air Force combat controller approached her hesitantly. The CCT was new to the joint program and had been watching from the observation deck, her heart sinking at Rourke's initial tirade, then soaring at Sharma's performance. "Senior Chief?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. How did you stay so calm when he was saying all that stuff?" Sharma paused her work. She looked at the young operator, seeing the familiar flicker of doubt and determination in her eyes. She didn't offer a grand speech or a motivational platitude. Instead, she picked up a piece of her equipment, the locking mechanism of a breaching charge. "Noise is a distraction," Sharma said, her voice low and even. His words, the alarms, the gunfire. "It's all just noise. You filter it. You find the signal." She demonstrated a complex sequence with the mechanism, her fingers moving with practiced grace. "The signal is the problem that needs to be solved. Escaping the cuffs, clearing the room, securing the objective. You focus only on the signal. The noise disappears." It was the most she had said all day. And for the young CCT, it was a more powerful lesson than any lecture or manual. The legend of Anya Sharma wasn't just about her physical prowess. It was about her unshakable mental fortress, her ability to find clarity in the chaos. The noise of prejudice was loud, but the signal of her competence was louder. It was a frequency that now resonated across the entire special operations community, a clear, undeniable broadcast of a new standard. The institutional memory of the military is long, and legends, once forged, are rarely forgotten. The events of that day in the Pandora's box hangar became more than just gossip. They became doctrine. Captain Rostova ensured it. The full, unedited video of Sharma's performance, captured from a dozen different camera angles, became a mandatory part of the curriculum for every incoming class at the joint training facility. It was presented without commentary, a silent testament to the art of the possible. Instructors would simply play the footage, and in the stunned silence that always followed, they would ask a single question: "What did you learn?" The answers were never about specific takedown techniques or tactical movements. They were about mindset, about composure, about the immense power of being underestimated. The hangar itself became hallowed ground. The specific training bay was unofficially nicknamed Echo's Run. Operators would walk through it with a certain reverence, pointing out the pillar where she'd broken the cuff, the catwalk she'd dropped from, the cluster of containers where she'd finished the fight. A small, unofficial monument appeared on the wall of the main briefing room. It wasn't a photograph or a plaque with her name. That would have violated the quiet, anonymous nature of her community. Instead, mounted on a simple piece of dark-stained wood, was a single, twisted steel handcuff, the very one she had broken open. Beneath it, a small brass plate was engraved with just 4 words: "Assumptions are a liability." No one needed to be told who or what it referred to. The artifact became a touchstone, a physical reminder of the day that cheap talk was silenced by pure, undeniable skill. Rourke, to his credit, embraced his humbling. His contract was reviewed, but Rostova argued for him to stay. "He has learned a lesson that cannot be taught in a classroom," she argued. "He is more valuable to us now than he ever was before." Rourke became a different kind of instructor. The arrogant, cynical gatekeeper was gone, replaced by a man obsessed with finding and nurturing genuine talent, regardless of the package it came in. He became the fiercest advocate for blind evaluations, for performance-based metrics, for stripping away every subjective bias and focusing only on what an operator could do. He often used himself as a cautionary tale, telling new recruits the story of the day he mistook a lioness for a lamb. Anya Sharma, for her part, simply went back to work. She deflected any praise, avoided any discussion of the event, and focused on her next mission. Her legacy was not something she cultivated. It was something she simply was. Weeks later, she was on the firing range, quietly mentoring a young SEAL who was struggling with his long-range marksmanship. She didn't lecture him on ballistics or windage. She just stood behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Calm your breathing. The rifle knows what to do. You just have to let it." Her quiet confidence, her profound competence, was a force multiplier. It didn't just make her better. It made everyone around her better. The legend was not just about what she had done. It was about the standard she set, a standard that was now rippling outwards, strengthening the very fabric of the community she served. Years passed. The story of Echo's Run became a foundational myth for a new generation of special operators. It was told to newcomers not to Leoneize a single individual, but to illustrate a core principle. The quiet professional is the soul of the community. It was a lesson in humility, a warning against the seductive poison of assumption. The world changed, conflicts shifted, and the nature of warfare evolved, but the central truth of that day remained timeless. Captain Eva Rostova was now Admiral Rostova, a powerful figure in naval intelligence, but she never forgot. She made it her personal mission to identify and break down the institutional barriers that produced men like the old Rourke, championing a new culture of meritocracy built on the bedrock of demonstrated ability. The Sharma Protocol, as it was informally known, became the gold standard for advanced evaluations, a series of performance-based tests where an operator's name, gender, and background were completely hidden from the assessors. All that mattered was the result. All that mattered was competence. Rourke remained at the training facility, now one of its most respected and effective instructors. The fire of his arrogance had been reforged into the steel of wisdom. He would often stand before a new class of operators, point to the warped handcuff on the wall, and tell them the story. He never spared himself in the telling, detailing his own ignorance with brutal honesty. "I looked at one of the most dangerous operators on this planet," he would say, his voice heavy with the memory, "and all I saw was what I expected to see. I saw a woman. I saw someone who didn't look like me, who didn't fit my outdated image of a warrior. And that assumption, that blindness, would have gotten me and my entire team killed in a real-world scenario. Do not make my mistake. Respect is not given based on reputation or appearance or what someone says. It is earned. It is earned in silence. It is earned through action." His story became the facility's most powerful teaching tool, a living testament to the theme that true strength requires no announcement. Anya Sharma, meanwhile, continued to walk the path of the quiet professional. Her name remained in the shadows, her accomplishments locked away in classified after-action reports. She led teams on missions that the public would never hear about, saving lives in ways that could never be celebrated. Her legacy wasn't written on a plaque or in a history book. It was written in the lives of the people she brought home. It was etched into the improved survival rates of the operators trained under the new protocol she inspired. It was reflected in the changed attitudes of instructors like Rourke. Her legacy was not a monument to be looked at, but a standard to be lived up to. True legacy is not what you leave behind in stone, but what you instill in the hearts of those who carry on the work. It is the quiet competence that continues to echo long after the noise of a single moment has faded. It is the silent professionalism that becomes the new baseline, the new expectation, the enduring truth of a community dedicated to being the best, not just saying they are. A new recruit stood before the briefing room wall, her gaze fixed on the twisted handcuff mounted on the dark wood. She was young, barely out of her initial training pipeline, and the joint facility was an intimidating world of legends and giants. She had heard the story of Echo's run, as all new arrivals did. She traced the 4 words on the brass plate with her eyes. Assumptions are a liability. For her, it was more than a story. It was a source of light, a promise that if she was good enough, that would be enough. An older man with a weathered face and a slight limp walked up beside her. It was Rourke. He didn't say a word for a long moment, just stared at the handcuff with her. "Heard the story?" he finally asked, his voice softer than the legends described. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Every word good," Rourke said with a nod. "Then you know the most important thing there is to know about this place. We don't care where you come from, what you look like, or who you know. We care about what you can do. Show us. That's all." He gave her a respectful nod and walked away, his words leaving a more lasting impression than any formal welcome brief could. Just then, a flag officer entered the room, flanked by 2 aides. The recruit snapped to attention. It was Admiral Rostova. The admiral paused, her eyes falling on the young operator standing before the memorial. She saw the determination there, the same fire she had seen in another woman's eyes all those years ago. Rostova gave the recruit a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, a silent passing of the torch. The cycle continued. The legacy was alive and breathing. The greatest warriors are not defined by the volume of their voice, but by the weight of their actions. They are not the ones who boast of their strength, but the ones whose presence alone changes the gravity of a room. Their worth is not debated in briefing rooms, but demonstrated in the breach. Their resumes are not printed on paper, but carved into the history of silent, successful missions. Their silence is not an absence of words, but a presence of focus. It is the profound calm at the epicenter of a hurricane of capability, a quiet confidence born of endless repetition and unshakable self-knowledge. They do not need to tell you who they are. They simply show you, and in the deafening silence that follows their actions, respect is not requested. It is conceded. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.